You know, it's really important I was in a constant battle with Don Landy, and he was gracious enough to humor me and pretend like he was listening. We got a 15-minute sound check before we started recording, which I found.
Alex Van Halen just dropped a truth bomb that changes how you hear David Lee Roth's solo albums forever. What sounded wild and fearless on the surface was missing the one thing that made Van Halen unstoppable. Once you hear what Alex reveals, those records will never sound the same again. Alex Van Halen never minces words when it comes to the legacy of Van Halen and the complicated history surrounding David Lee Roth's solo albums. As the drummer and quiet backbone of one of the most explosive rock bands in history, Alex has spent decades watching the narrative twist, glamorize, and sometimes outright distort what really happened behind the scenes. When he finally opens what up about the problems he saw with Roth's albums after the split, it is not bitterness talking, but perspective earned through time, success, and loss. His words cut through nostalgia and expose a truth many fans sensed but never fully understood. According to Alex Van Halen, the core problem with David Lee Roth's albums was never about talent, attitude, or even ambition. Roth had all of those, in abundance. The real issue, as Alex sees it, was the absence of a grounding force that could translate raw personality into lasting musical identity. In Van Halen, Roth had a band that balanced his chaos, sharpened his instincts, and turned his wild ideas into focused, dangerous rock records. Once that structure disappeared, the cracks began to show in ways that glossy production and big budgets could not hide. Alex has pointed out that many of Roth's solo albums felt like showcases rather than statements. They were loud, flashy, and packed with personality, but often lacked a unifying musical spine. The songs jumped from style to style, sometimes thrilling, sometimes confusing, without the internal logic that made classic Van Halen albums flow effortlessly. From Alex's perspective, this was not an accident. It was the result of too many voices pulling in different directions and no single musical vision strong enough to dominate. He has also spoken about the revolving door of musicians in Roth's solo career. While the players were undeniably skilled, Alex believed that constant change prevented the formation of real chemistry. Van Halen worked because the band functioned like a single organism, instinctive and almost telepathic. Roth's albums, by contrast, often sounded assembled rather than lived in. Alex has said that listeners can feel that difference, even if they cannot articulate it. Chemistry leaves fingerprints on recordings, and its absence does the same. Another issue Alex Van Halen has highlighted is lyrical depth. Roth was always a master entertainer, but Alex felt that without the band dynamic pushing him, Roth leaned too heavily on surface-level bravado. The humor, the swagger, and the innuendo were still there, but they no longer contrasted against moments of tension, danger, or vulnerability. In Van Halen, that contrast came naturally. On the solo records, it sometimes felt one-dimensional, as if the mask never came off. Alex has also been blunt about production choices. He believed Roth chased trends instead of setting them. Where Van Halen albums often sounded ahead of their time, Roth's solo work sometimes sounded locked into the moment it was created. Big drums, polished guitars, and radio-friendly made the albums commercially viable, but Alex questioned their longevity. To him, great records should grow with the listener, not age alongside fashion. Despite all this, Alex Van Halen has never denied Roth's importance to rock history. His criticism is not about failure but about missed potential. He has said that Roth could have created a body of work equal to Van Halen's legacy if he had embraced collaboration over control. In Alex's eyes, Roth's albums are fascinating, documents of personality unleashed, but also cautionary tales about what happens when balance disappears. This perspective does not diminish Roth's achievements. It reframes them, adding depth to a story fans thought they already knew. Continues by making it clear that the real issue with David Lee Roth's albums was never about charts, critics, or even fan reactions in the moment. For Alex, the deeper problem revealed itself slowly, over years of listening, revisiting, and watching how the music aged. He explains that great albums do not simply survive time, they deepen with it. They reveal new layers, emotions, and meanings as listeners grow older. In his view, many of Roth's solo records struggled to do that because they were built around immediacy rather than durability. Alex has often reflected on how Van Halen albums carried an internal tension that made them feel alive. There was always a sense that the band was on the edge of losing control, and that danger became part of the sound. Roth's solo albums, by comparison, felt safer. Even when the music was loud and aggressive, Alex felt the risk had been carefully managed. Everything sounded planned, polished, and contained. To Alex, rock music loses part of its soul when it stops sounding like it might collapse at any second. He also points out that Roth's solo work leaned heavily on image and attitude, sometimes at the expense of musical storytelling. Alex believes that image can amplify music, but it cannot replace it. In Van Halen, the visual spectacle was supported by songs that could stand on their own without theatrics. With Roth's albums, Alex felt the balance tilted too far to presentation. Records demanded attention but did not always reward repeated listening in the same way. Another aspect Alex Van Halen has addressed is the emotional honesty embedded in the music. He explains that Van Halen's best songs worked because they combined confidence with vulnerability. Beneath the swagger, there was always a trace of insecurity, longing, or urgency. That contrast made the songs human. Alex felt that Roth's solo albums often stayed locked in performance mode, rarely allowing cracks to show. Without those cracks, the music could feel impressive but distant. Alex has also spoken about rhythm and groove as overlooked elements in the discussion. As a drummer, he pays close attention to how songs breathed. He believes that Van Halen's rhythm section gave the music a natural push and pull that made it feel organic. In Roth's albums, the rhythms were tighter and more controlled, but Alex felt that control sometimes came at the cost of feel. The songs moved forward, but they did not always swing, and that subtle difference mattered more than most listeners realized. He has acknowledged that Roth's choice to surround himself with elite musicians was understandable, but Alex questions whether technical perfection was prioritized over chemistry. In Van Halen, mistakes, imperfections, and spontaneous moments were often left intact because they carried energy. Roth's albums, in Alex's view, were smoothed down until very little unpredictability remained. The result was music that sounded impressive on first listen, but less exciting over time. Alex Van Halen also addresses the psychological side of the split and its aftermath. He suggests that Roth, freed from the internal checks of a band, may have felt pressure to constantly prove himself. That pressure can push artists toward excess, whether in sound, style, or attitude. Alex believes this pressure subtly shaped Roth's albums, making them louder, bigger, and flashier than necessary. Instead of letting songs speak, they often shouted. Despite these criticisms, Alex has made it clear that he respects Roth's drive and fearlessness. He recognizes that stepping away from one of the biggest bands in the world required confidence bordering on recklessness. However, Alex insists that courage alone does not guarantee artistic clarity. Without trusted collaborators who are willing to challenge ideas, even the most confident artists can lose direction. Roth's albums, to Alex, illustrate this truth vividly. As Alex reflects further, he emphasizes that Van Halen was never about any single individual. It was about interaction, friction, and shared instinct. Every member played a role in shaping the sound, and removing one element changed the entire equation. Roth's solo work, viewed through this lens, becomes a study in what happens when one voice dominates without resistance. The music remains entertaining, but the magic becomes harder to sustain. In the end, Alex Van Halen's perspective is not meant to rewrite history, but to deepen it. He invites listeners to hear Roth's albums not as isolated successes or failures, but as chapters in a larger story about balance, collaboration, and creative limits. His words remind fans that chemistry is not something you can hire, polish, or manufacture. It is something that either exists or it does not. And once it is gone, even the brightest spotlight cannot fully replace it.